that might come through foot and mouth disease, Mr. Chairman. The government is simply not prepared.
I call the Honourable Minister Nathan Guy.
Mr. Chair, well, it's an opportunity for me to respond to the member who's just resumed his seat, because I think that Mr. O'Connor wants to play politics with what is a very serious issue. Actually, I challenge Mr. O'Connor whether he's actually read the whole report or just read the executive summary. Because if Mr. O'Connor has read the whole report, he will realise that the Auditor-General actually says we have got a pretty good system. And there are 7 recommendations that I have said, and the Director-General from MPI has said, that we will take those recommendations on board. What Mr. O'Connor fails to recognise, is that we do have a world-class biosecurity system. Yes, we do. The Auditor-General was sitting in the room when we ran the foot and mouth exercise called Taurus last year. And as a result of that exercise, we are adopting a lot of the learnings from that. Unlike when that member was last in government, it's worthwhile noting that they ran a simulation on foot and mouth. And what was interesting was that those recommendations just sat on the shelf. The 2005 recommendations under Labor from running a foot and mouth disease exercise, the recommendations weren't even adopted. They weren't even adopted. So how dare that member come down into this House and say that we're sitting on our hands, because that is not true. We will take these recommendations, we will take them seriously. I say to the member, this is my #1 priority, biosecurity. And for that member to come in here and say that we aren't prepared, I want to raise another issue with him, and that is about capability. Last year, the ministry employed an extra 45 new quarantine inspectors. 11 more were recruited in January this year. 7 detector dog handlers were recruited as well. And there's a further 4 and 11 new detector dogs have graduated as well. We take our biosecurity and our border control extremely seriously. Importantly, what I want to say, Mr. Chair, is right now the country is under a pretty severe state of drought. And it's good that it has rained. It is fantastic. What it will do, this rainfall, is it will do a couple of things. One, it will lift the spirits of rural communities. The second one is we'll get pasture growth growing as well, which is hugely important. We don't have a shortage of rainfall in this country. We have a storage issue. We need to store rain in the winter months and utilise it in the summer months. It's good for our economic growth, it's good for our environment. It's pretty simple. But when you look at Labor, I'm pretty sure they're opposing. Here's a question for Damien O'Connor.
No.
Does Damien O'Connor support irrigation schemes or not? He can't answer it. Damien O'Connor is silent because here's what his finance spokesman said. David Parker said recently, it's ill-considered subsidies that are coming from the taxpayer dollar to irrigation schemes. That's what Labor thinks. So right now, the country is pretty much under a drought, although let's hope it's breaking. And Labor aren't prepared to help rural, regional communities invest in irrigation schemes. Unlike this government where we've said, here's $80 million to kickstart some of these regional irrigation schemes. We'd like to see that go to $400 million. And we believe we can increase the productivity and look after the environment better with these regional irrigation schemes. There's about 400,000 hectares where we can lift our productivity, improve the water quality of our freshwater rivers, but yet Labor aren't prepared to back rural New Zealand. Shameful. What we're also debating right now out in our communities is a generational change in water and fresh water, and also RMA as well. This is the once-in-a-generation water reform that we're having pretty good dialogue across New Zealand at the moment. And I wish to acknowledge the Land and Water Forum that have worked hard on this issue over the last 4 years. They have done fantastic work, and we need to acknowledge that. Mr Chair.
I call the Honourable Minister Nathan
Chair.
Guy.
The biggest issue that we're talking up and down New Zealand about fresh water and storage is to do with water quality and water quantity, and we're getting very, very good feedback. Overall, water is just one part of growing our economic development. We have a very ambitious target of increasing our exports from 30 to 40% of GDP by 2025. And the primary industry, of course, we all know, plays a huge part, 72% of merchandise exports. We are a nation of around 4.5 million people, and we feed about 40 million people around the world. We export to 160 markets. We are recognised here in New Zealand as a bit of a world leader in innovation and food safety standards. And indeed, recently, I've just been over to Latin America with the Prime Minister and a business delegation of about 25. And it becomes very apparent that we are world leading in our food safety standards. We carefully manage the impacts on our production of the environment. We have a real emphasis on animal welfare as well and looking after our animals, and we have a world-class biosecurity system. And if you think about where we've come from since the 1980s when we had those big reforms, and that's what happens when we get on the world stage. They want to learn from us what happened in the 1980s and how we adjusted. The important point is that now we are exporting the same amount of lamb meat that we did in the 1980s, but from about half the number of sheep. So that's, when you get on the world stage, they look down on little old New Zealand and think that we are fantastic with our innovation, our technology, and lifting our productivity. And that's why this government has invested in the Primary Growth Partnership. That's the government investing side by side with industry, being hugely successful. 13 projects up and running as we speak. 650 million invested in collaboration with the government and the industry. And that has been extremely worthwhile. And we think about the Latin American trip. What became hugely important to me when I got into places like Colombia, where most of the countries have a huge amount of land that's undeveloped, they are very keen to foster joint ventures and partnerships with New Zealand because they realise that we have this wealth of experience in innovation and technology, and that is going to be the future. We already have a very close working relationship with Chile. Chile is pretty much a cousin of New Zealand. You think about Colombia, when the President Santos stands up and says we want to see a free trade agreement with New Zealand, that is absolutely fantastic because there's a huge potential for New Zealand and Latin America, particularly in Colombia. What we've also signalled that we're keen to invest in Colombia is $4 million with some aid money to get this technology and expertise to work with their farmers closely. And the signal that I've got from Colombia is 150 of their farmers are keen to come down into New Zealand, and we can showcase all of the good work that we do in our primary industries. So in conclusion, Mr Chair, New Zealand is extremely well placed on the world stage. A very successful trip to Latin America with some deliverables to come from those 25-odd business groups that travelled with us. Well, they had something like 138 meetings, and about 42 have now concrete leads where they can follow up and continue to work on joint ventures and partnerships with these countries of Latin America. I'm very ambitious for the primary industries. We've got a world-class biosecurity system. We will adopt the recommendations from the Auditor General. We will continue to make improvements. And this government is backing rural New Zealand. This government cares about rural New Zealand. Labor doesn't care because they don't back irrigation projects. The Greens don't care because they don't believe that irrigation projects are sustainable. The Greens and Labor coming together with New Zealand First, rural New Zealand know that there will be capital gains tax, an enlarged ETS that will cripple business. This National Party, supported by ACT and United Future, supports rural communities. The other side of the House, I'm embarrassed to say they don't.
I call the honourable member Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm pleased to rise to take a call on behalf of New Zealand First.